Do you like books? I mean, really, really like books? Then you're in the right place. Each week, your host, Sam Hankin, interviews the best of today's top-selling authors and the up-and-coming superstars of modern literature. This is The Avid Reader. Here is your host, Sam Hankin.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of The Avid Reader, brought to you by Wellington Square Bookshop. Our guest today is Louise Willder, author of Blurb Your Enthusiasm, published by One World. It'll be released in early October. So if you come into our bookstore now, it will not be on the front table, but it will be next month. Louise has been a copywriter at Penguin, one of my favorite publishers, for 25 years. And during that time, she's produced about 5,000 blurbs. So blurb is a funny word, isn't it? And when I've been telling people about the book, a minority of them, a good minority, ask me, what is a blurb? They really do. So first, a blurb in the United States is not the same as a blurb is in the UK. Here, it's an enthusiastic recommendation by a recognized author of some repute. And the most prolific blurber here is Gary Steingart, whose blurbs have become a sort of comic relief for many authors. I don't think he's read half the books he's blurbed. Here's an example. If you like pugs, wine, and grease, Vintage Attraction is for you. It's so post-modern, it's almost pre-modern. I read it on a stone tablet and loved every word. And I think when authors can't find someone to blurb, they just go to Gary Steingart. But back to the subject at hand. In the UK, the blurb is kind of like... it's the intriguing synopsis of work, and it's kind of, generally it's contained on the inside flap of the dust cover or on the back of the book, as it is for me on Louise's book, which doesn't have a dust cover yet because I have a galley, but it will. So the blurb, like the cover of the book, this isn't the greatest analogy, to me is kind of like, well, first of all, it draws you in, as the title and the cover does, for every customer in my bookshop. You can't judge a book by its cover is a rule violated by every single person who comes into my bookshop. And judging by a title or a blurb is almost as often violated. So I always felt that a blurb should be like looking at the outside of a jigsaw puzzle box, where you know what the book is about, but you know you're the one that has to put all the pieces together. That's type of a kind of a facile definition because it doesn't really tell you that much. In any event, we have an all-star blurber here today to give us a history of the word and its meaning, as well as a lesson in how to churn them out daily. So welcome, Louise. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. That's a great introduction.
Thanks. Well, first of all, the book, Are You a Bromide, is one of my favorite books, my brother and I favorite books. And because of you, I just spent money because I went on Avid Books and bought a first edition, just like impulsively. So for better or for worse, you're going to find yourself dealing with the sulfitic today. So talk a little bit. I mean, it's not the very beginning of the word. Well, it is the beginning kind of the word blurb. Talk about that because it's really funny.
I think it is the beginning. As far as I could tell, it's 1907, isn't it? I think the book Are You a Bromide, which I guess I should translate. A bromide is like a kind of a really dull person. So that's the question that this book is asking. And obviously it's a comic book, and so the word blurb seems to have started with this advertisement for the book, which features an image of a rather enthusiastic lady who's called Belinda Blurb, which some of my friends now call me, you'll be pleased to hear. It says this is Miss Belinda Blurb in the act of blurbing, and so she's giving this whole spiel, this about how this book is so good that it's going to make you want to crawl through a tropical jungle and bite somebody on the neck, and it goes on and on and on. It says it's the proud purple penultimate, and so it's a lampoon of this hyperbolic language that is used around books, and that obviously we still use around books today. And I love the word. It's an incredibly silly word. But whether you take its meaning in the UK sense or the US sense. I went into a classroom to talk to them about books, and when I said, oh, this is called the blurb, they just thought it was absolutely hilarious. This is like a little class of 5-year-olds just thought it was the funniest word they'd ever heard. So I wrote a whole book about a very silly word.
Yeah, and he's such a funny guy because he also was the guy who did that silly rhyme. I never saw a purple cow. I never hope to see one, but I can tell you anyhow, I'd rather see than be one.
I didn't know that. Oh,
Yep, he's the guy. So, it's funny. I'm akin to you in that when I was a child, like you did, I would read everything. Even when I was eating breakfast, I would read the side of cereal boxes. And I found it fascinating, even the ingredients.
oh, that's wonderful.
So you were like that?
Absolutely. And weirdly, I think I still am now, and maybe even more so from doing my job for so long. I feel like I don't know if you're the same. I look at the words I see on everything, even, if it's like food packaging or something, or a description I will read of a film on Netflix. I just feel like I'm so fascinated by words that sell things to us, and who writes them and how do they come up with them, and are they accurate, which obviously in the sense of Netflix they're frequently not. I just find that whole idea really interesting. But yes, obviously words have been a huge part of my life since I was very, very young, since childhood reading, and I think even before you can read, you grasp words on a kind of sensory level as well through rhymes and songs. And so yeah, I'm very lucky to have worked with words for a quarter of a century.
Yeah, it's fun. And as a bookseller, obviously I feel the same way. And also I've been creating book titles for like the past half century, because you hear people talking every day. Do you ever do that? And you go, oh, that would be a great book title. I do it all the time. And now I can't stop. And my stepdaughter can't stop. Like I do Glimmer on the Moon, Definition of Things, Sand Timer, Written in Stone, Put on Your Face. But my favorite one is Shoes for a Better Life, because I saw that on a store. And I thought, that's a great title, Shoes for a Better Life.
Write these books now. Go on.
I know. I thought I could just call the book title or novel titles. Just call it novel titles. Yeah. Or not, in the sense that when you talk about puns, so it'd be novel titles. But
there we go.
Anyway, there I go, going off on my own. But it's funny. Here's something that I think, because I did a word search, you don't talk about. The first thing I do, especially when I'm buying literature, which I'd rather do than Girl on a Train. And so the first thing I do is look at the epigraph, always. That's the first thing I look at.
That's really interesting. Why do you think that is? I'm not asking you questions now.
Well, I always ask the author, I say, I'm really interested in your epigraph because you must have taken a lot of time to think about what other authors' words reflect what you can look for in your book. I did, well, you talk about Neil Gaiman, and I forget which book. Oh, Coraline. I wrote it down. His epigraph is, fairy tales are more than true, not because they tell us that dragons exist, but because they tell us dragons can be beaten. But my favorite one is Nabokov's book, The Gift, and the epigraph is, an oak is a tree, a rose is a flower, a deer is an animal, a sparrow is a bird, Russia is our fatherland, death is inevitable.
Oh my God. Oh, that's good.
Which also reminds me of, you talk about movies and talk about why you think the movie Toy Story has the best name of a movie title.
Yes, yeah, this is a part of the book. I mean, as you know, I talk about book titles a lot, but then there's part of the book as well where I investigated the kind of words that sell, because I think there's been a lot of research on this. There have been books written about it where people, they actually came up with an algorithm, a way of going through books to see the kind of words that actually help a novel become a bestseller. And one of the key things seems to be clear, concrete language, an incredibly simple message. And so I gave Toy Story as an example of something that I just feel works so well, because the things that you want the most when you're young, when you're a child. You know, I guess food would be there as well. But apart from that, you want to play and you want a story. So I feel like something which just seems ridiculously simple, but is actually so effective. And I gave a few other examples of things I thought worked well in that realm. You know, like Michael Moore's book "Stupid White Men." Again, it's so simple, but how can you forget that? You know, I think one of the things I talk about with book titles is if you want to have a word of mouth hit, you know, people have got to remember it. So I just feel that there's something kind of almost brazen in that simplicity that works so well.
The movie for me is 2001. Because I've loved, well, at the time when I read it, because since I'm an old man, when I read it, 2001 seems so far away. And I was thinking, wow, 2000, I'll be 48. And then I go, well, what's the point of being alive when you're 48 anyway? That's where I thought back then. Now it seems so young.
Yeah, and I'm turning 50 this year, so you know, in 3 weeks actually. So yeah, I'm sure you're right.
Sounds like I'm complimenting you, but you certainly look much younger than 50.
Well, that's the beauty of a video call, isn't it?
Yeah, especially when you have a ring light, which I do. So
absolutely.
Oh yeah, so 2001, A Space Odyssey. You do this all leads. It's really good the way your book kind of leads from one to another that I can remember, because you talk a lot about subtitles, which I despise. And the last 90% of authors I've interviewed, most of whom have written nonfiction, every one of them has a subtitle. I'm sick of them.
Yeah. And I think that's something, I wonder if, do you think it's because you're in the States as well, where I think subtitles can often be really long, can't they? And I feel now they're kind of larded with words, because the idea is that they will help with search on Amazon, and I think this is a big part of that, you know, that subtitles just are ridiculously long. And I found there are loads of articles that I found, you know, in the New York Times and things like that, why are book subtitles so long? And this was given as one of the reasons. And I do think that there is this idea that, you know, they're kind of like the wallflower at the party. They're there just, you know, no one remembers them in the end, do they? You know, that, I mean, no. I mean, I know you remembered the one from 2001, which I think is slightly different with fiction, but I think with nonfiction, they do so much heavy lifting in terms of, you know, why, how, where, you know, just packing it with information that it just becomes annoying.
Well, you know, I read that book, Salt. I interviewed the guy who wrote it. I can't remember, Salt. And it says, a story of the world's most important. And you do it too. And you go, really?
Yeah. It was like, God, the fish that changed the world. I mean, everything's changing the world, isn't it? You know?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I just feel like if you can't just get it in the title, just leave it be, you know?
Yeah, that's what someone said to me. If you can't get the subtitle right, there's something wrong with the title, you know. And if you can't get the title right, there's something wrong with the book. so that's worth considering.
The only time it really works is before there were blurbs, like in the books you cite, like Gulliver's Travels. Those subtitles are incredibly great and funny.
Oh, they're amazing, aren't they? And it's this idea is that the title page of your book, because obviously books didn't have covers, the title page was where you laid out your wares to the reader, and that's the whole idea. That I give the example of Robinson Crusoe as well. It's brilliant. It's like Defoe is giving his elevator pitch on the title page of his book, and it's got, you know, the word pirates in massive capital letters, because, you know, come on, what's more of a seller than pirates? I mean, really. And so I love discovering, that's one of the things I really enjoyed when I was researching this book, discovering the idea of these sort of prototype blurbs before you even had book covers. The idea that people have always wanted to sell their books, you know, as soon as the market started hotting up, as soon as there were printing presses, everyone wanted to sell their book. And so that I think the first advertisement that has been discovered in England is for a book, and it's the printer saying, you know, how it's well printed, it's well priced, and you know, you can find his shop on this street. And I love that. I think, this idea that we live in this, that we're in a kind of overheated market now, and that our world is full of hype. I just think, just look to the past, and maybe it wasn't that different.
The other one you discuss, which, because I think he's one of the funniest people in the world when he wants to be, is A Modest Proposal, because it doesn't tell you what's inside, but it makes you want to read it, and then you find out what it is, and you're appalled.
Yes. Oh yeah, and that still has so much relevance now, I think, as well. I feel like it crops up all the time in this country, especially, when some crackpot politician comes up with some awful scheme, people always refer to Jonathan Swift. I feel like this, I don't know if we should say this idea, is that the poor could come, basically you could eat the children of the poor, and it's horrific, but obviously was done as a deadpan satire. And I think, that's so fascinating. And I think there was so much at that time, like political tracts, pamphlets, everyone wanting to get their view across. And so one of the other things I looked at is, the time of the Civil War, the political pamphlets that were everywhere. The language on those is just magnificent. It's absolute rhetoric in overdrive. People trying to outdo each other with the language that they use in order to sell their words. And so, hype is nothing new.
Well, with Swift also, it reminds me of Borat in the United States talking to someone like, say, Bob Dole, and saying the most outrageous things about, say, gun control. And Borat will say, I think it's a good idea, and not in his accent, if all school children are issued AK-47s in order to protect themselves. And Dole goes, I think that's an excellent idea.
God. Oh.
So it's a good way to convince people who watch it that, holy mackerel, this is what people actually think would be a good idea. And that's what I think Swift was trying to do.
It's terrifying.
It is. Yes, it's terrifying. But it's good, because that keeps reminding me of stuff. Like, you even have examples of kind of ancient blurbs too.
Yeah, perhaps this is stretching it, but there's a writer
I'm very interested in, an Italian writer called Roberto Calasso, who sadly died last year, I think it was, who's kind of, a literary machine. Basically, he was a publisher at Adelphi in Milan. He's written amazing books, and he's very interested in the history of the book and the history of publishing. And he talks about, the dedications at the start of books as being very early blurbs, in a sense, the way that we would see blurbs. It's someone trying to
persuade people that their book is of good quality and to assure people. And so I think that's really interesting, since like the poet Catullus in ancient Rome, he has a lot of these at the beginning of his books. And it's, I trust, reader, that you will enjoy this work that I'm setting before you. And so I think it's lovely. It's just, it's the same thing. It's like, I see a blurb as kind of being a book's calling card, in a sense. It's your first introduction to it. And so I think you can see this all the way back through literary history, the idea of someone wanting to entice people to read their work.
Oh, another thing that you did early on in the book was talked about titles that were thrown away before the title. Great Gatsby is one that and then I thought, I wonder what she thought of, what you thought of before you thought of your punny, and then we can talk about puns. Blow up your enthusiasm. And then, unfortunately for me, because I was going to ask you that question, then you say it later on. You actually do it.
It's
and I thought,
a footnote, I think, isn't it, in the book? I can't. Yeah. There were so many.
I think for a long time the book was going to be called Cover Stories, which I think is a nice title. And but obviously, like most writers, I think I worried about it constantly. And so I spoke to a lot of friends in publishing, and some of them whose opinions I really trust were just like, no, it's too forgettable. You need, they said you need something fun, you need something that people are going to remember, because this is a book about, admit it, it's a fairly niche subject. I hope it isn't that way when you read the book, because I broaden it out to talk about all sorts of things to do with books and language and words, but you need to create a mood. And so I thought, with a pun, I realize they're not everyone's cup of tea, but I think, with a pun, hopefully this says to a reader, you're going to have a good time here. Don't worry.
Oh, it's great for the United States, because Curb Your Enthusiasm is like an institution here.
One of my favorite shows.
Yeah. I also wondered whether you blurbed your own book on the back, if you wrote the blurb on the back. Did you?
Oh, yeah, I did. And actually, I can, if you don't mind me getting up for a sec, I can show you the finished book.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you to do that, because I can't, and that's going to help sell the book.
Just hold on one sec.
Take your time.
I should have had it right at my side, shouldn't I?
You should have.
So the final book we've got, it doesn't have a dust jacket. It's like a lovely kind of board. It's got very nice end pages.
I love that.
So on the back, there wasn't actually that much space. We had kind of this much space to do a blurb, because I wanted to get some of the nice endorsements on there as well. So yeah, it's like, it was kind of a joint effort. I know I say in the book that authors really shouldn't write their own blurbs as a rule, because they just try and throw everything in there and make it far too long. But in the end, I just couldn't resist. So I worked on it with my editor. And I think I never know if I'm happy with the end result. I think I am. But another thing I did was to get 6 copywriter friends of mine who work or have worked in publishing, each to write a blurb for the book, just for fun, really, which it appears in the final book as an appendix, because I just wanted to see how different they would be. And each of them is completely different, and they each focus on a different thing, and I feel like their characters come across as well. And the nicest part was that they got to have their names on it, because obviously, as a blurb writer, you write all these things and then your name never appears on it. Your words are read by people, but they don't know who's written them, and so each of them got to have their name by their blurb. So I was quite pleased with that. But they didn't end up on the book itself, because there was about like that much space.
I thought it was like translation, which you actually bring up about, it's the translation is basically the translator. We all live inside here, and the translator is using his or her entire subjective experience as a person to translate Nabokov's books, except for his son.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it's interesting, isn't it? I think it's so subjective. I think the way you approach a work. And I think, with something like this, when you're trying to boil it down, it's like editing a film or something. You can cut it in so many different ways, and you can approach a book in so many different ways. And I feel like, there's no correct way of writing about a book. There's no correct book, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I was actually having a discussion last night about the book, and this gentleman argued with me because I said, the girl with the dragon tattoo, before that it was Men Who Hated Women, and he goes, well, what's wrong with that? He goes, the only reason it's popular is because it's popular. You don't know whether that title would have been just as popular afterwards, like The Great Gatsby.
Yeah, nobody. It's what William Goldman said. Nobody knows anything.
He said it about movies, but it certainly applies to books, I think, doesn't it? Of course, nobody knows. Yeah, I mean, if something's that great, then absolutely, it may have just become a hit anyway. And of course, you will never know. But I do feel with all of these things that it can't hurt, can it, to have a have a memorable title rather than an extremely odd one. I talk about the book that became known as Alone in Berlin, that became a big hit over here. It was written during the Second World War by a German writer called Hans Fallada, and the translation of the German title is Every Man Dies Alone. Again, like the original Dragon Tattoo title, it's a bit of a downer, and so the idea was that it would give the book a sense of place. And I think of course, nobody has a clue. There's no way you can know. It's that there was a businessman who said half the money I spend on advertising is wasted. The trouble is I just don't know which half. And it's, of course, there's no way of quantifying this. But I think why not give your book a title that people will remember and that will have an emotional impact on them.
And then after you read it, Great Expectations is one. And the other one I've always thought of is All Quiet on the Western Front. I can't think of what else, in my mind, I can't think of what else it could possibly have been called, but I don't know why.
Yes, it's just become part of the language, hasn't it? That phrase, it's so true. And Catch 22. There's in fact an entire book called Why Not Catch 21, which I recommend. It's really interesting. Just the idea of all these lost titles, these kind of parallel universes where 1984 might have been called
The Last Man in Europe, and we would never know if they would have become as famous without them.
No, you don't. It's like, as you said, one of the many things, that you just will never have any idea whether it was the right choice or not. In fact, when I've interviewed like 1,000 authors, and for the most case, authors really don't do their covers and titles and blurbs because the publisher is trying to sell the book. That's the main thing they're trying to do.
Yes, it's so true. And I think there can be, when you're an author, perhaps sometimes you're just too close to the work. You need that outsider to step back and see the wood for the trees and work out what's essential and what isn't. Because I think, after working on thousands and thousands of words for years, it can be the hardest thing in the world to suddenly try and strip it down. I think that's a real skill, and it's a different type of writing. And so I think that is where, publishers, blurb writers can really help.
Did you do your own, did you vet or do your own cover? It's a great cover because I love books without dust jackets. I love them on the front table. People grab them, and I don't know why. I do too. And I don't know why I do it, but I will immediately grab a book without a dust jacket or that's in a smaller format sometimes. Oh, and you talk about chapbooks too. Oh.
Right. No, this is encouraging. Like, weirdly, my husband hates dust jackets too. He just takes them off as soon as he gets the book and puts them. We have these little piles of them around the house. He's taken them off because they're just too annoying.
So you're definitely not alone in that. I did actually. I had quite a lot of say over the cover design, which I was really pleasantly surprised by, because I know that doesn't always happen for all authors at all. I'm not sure if it's because I have worked in publishing as well, I guess, or my publishers are just very sympathetic people. But there were quite a few options, and there was one which was really nice, which was made up of lots of bits of blurbs from jackets, which looked really good. But in the end, we decided just was a little bit academic, perhaps, just a little bit cold. And when I thought of the ideal reader I had in mind, who was actually somebody I work with, I kind of thought, would Jess like this? I don't think she would. So, and I thought, no, I think she would prefer the adorable little mouse much more.
Well, there's this in America, they say a billboard. Actually, you talk about billboards too. You say there's a saying in America that you should never put more than 7 words on a billboard because you're driving past and you can't absorb that. It's a good rule.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you don't want to cause a pile up motorway. It's so true. That's a really good rule, actually, which I didn't know. But in fact, I think you usually see fewer than that, don't you? On some of those huge billboards.
And then when you see the ones with lots of words, you go, "Oh, this is so silly. It'll never work."
Yeah.
That's my latest thing. I walk into some place I walk into a restaurant, it's closed, but the neon sign on the front says open. And I go, I wonder why they did that. Don't they tell somebody, turn the open sign off when the store is closed? That's my new thing. Why would they do that? Which once again has nothing to do with your book, and I do this. So you talk about the novel or the Blurb Generator, which I had no idea existed. So I went to the website and I entered all the stuff you're supposed to enter. It wasn't good, but it was really funny.
Yeah, exactly. They're
just mad, aren't they? I can't believe he's saying, surely nobody actually uses these things because they're so terrible, but they are very funny. And the appendix that I spoke about, that as a final little joke for the reader, I guess, there is a blurb for my book, which has been made by a blurb generator, which is truly terrible.
It's like when you walk in the United States, Barnes and Noble, and there's a whole aisle in the magazine section about how to write, how to publish a great novel. And sometimes I pick them up because I think, well, maybe I can, as you said, write the great American novel. But there's nothing in there that would help anybody. You just have to write.
Yeah, exactly. If you don't want to do it, then yeah, I don't think any guidebook is going to help.
No, not at all. The other thing that's funny is, I made a list since I owned the bookstore of, and you know it too, there's like 144 novels in the past couple of years that use the word girl in the cover, in the title. Now it's Paris, like the Paris bookseller, the Paris library, the Paris librarian, the Paris whatever. How does that happen?
Interesting. I think sadly it's because most publishers are followers rather than leaders. I don't know if you'll
agree. I think we're a lot of publishers are very cautious, and so as soon as something succeeds, they all latch on. And it happens with cover design as well. There was a book, Three Women by Lisa Tadeo, I think you pronounce it, which I know is a huge success in the States as well. And it was published by Bloomsbury in the UK and had this beautiful cover using an old master painting of some fruit, which made it look very classy, very beautiful. And now you just can't move for fruit on book covers. Everywhere you look, there's like a peach or an apple or some beautifully placed piece of fruit. And so I think there are just fashions, aren't there? They just come and go. And it's the same with book titles. It's the same with everything. There are a few that break the mold, and then everyone follows. But that's interesting about the Paris thing. Yeah, now I think about it, actually, I feel like I have seen a lot of Paris related titles.
It's like the beginning the beginning girl one, I guess, is Gone Girl. You talk about Gone Girl. And the other one is like The Sweetest Fig. And that's another novel I wonder, what if it was called something else? Because The Sweetest Fig doesn't seem really, like, to me, a great novel title.
No. No, not at all. Yeah, they makes me think, there's something not very appealing about it. I don't know why.
You should know why. You've been doing this for a quarter of a century.
Nobody knows anything, I told you.
The other thing you said that was funny, because it hit home for me, was about bookshelves and holiday cottages. And whenever I'm in a furniture store, they always put books in the shelves so it looks like it's lived in. And I always take one of them because I figure it's not really stealing. They're worthless, and they just bought them by the yard, by the meter. And they're always interesting books, no matter which one I take. And I realize all books are interesting in some way.
That's such a lovely thought, and I completely agree with you. I feel like every book has something to love in it, and that's something I say in the book. And I feel that one of the jobs you're doing when you are promoting the book is to find that thing to love in the book. And I completely agree with you. I find old book jackets absolutely fascinating. As you mentioned that some of the really schlocky old things that you find in holiday cottages, like old horror novels and things like that. I just love them. And I think that's one of the things I really enjoyed finding out about, why, that a cover, the way a book is packaged, the words that appear on the book as well as inside the book, they're part of its history, they're part of its physical history, and something that you can't eliminate. And I just find that absolutely fascinating that they still speak to us across the years. There was somebody who designed that book, somebody chose that font, someone chose those words.
And I love the fact that they're still there. They're kind of indelible.
Yeah, and it's like what we were just talking about, nobody knows anything. One of the things you did in the book was talk about, I forgot who said it, just turn to page 69.
Oh yeah, Marshall McLuhan, who
Oh yeah,
was really interesting. Yeah, his book, The Medium is the Massage, is something that I just wanted to write about because I think it sort of encapsulates that idea, that tension between a book's contents and its appearance. You know, I think, you know, the package and what's inside, and he played with that idea a lot, and he plays with language and graphics as well. It's all about the effect that words have on us, and obviously he basically predicted the internet age. I think it's fascinating if you read it now. He talks about this global village essentially, and his idea about how the media shape us and affect us emotionally is just so interesting now. You know, if you're spending an evening scrolling through Twitter and then feeling terrible about yourself afterwards, you know, he essentially predicted that. But he one of the other things he talks about is this page 69 test. So he says, you know, if you want to know if the book's for you, you just turn to page 69 and see what you think. So I did it myself, and I found that it worked. Maybe I wanted it to work, but everything I looked at, there were, you know, a few books that I hadn't actually read and had meant to. There was a Stefan Zweig novel, and I opened it and thought, oh yeah, this sounds great. So, you know, maybe I should just be out of a job and everyone should turn to page 69.
What do you think I did when I read that? What's the first thing I did?
Turn to page 69.
Turn to page 69 of your book. And it's the page that talks about T.S. Eliot and his blurbs. And I go, this is really interesting.
Oh, good. It worked.
It definitely did.
Read thousands of blurbs for Faber and Faber. I found that really fascinating. And he found it really difficult as well, which I also found quite hard. And some of the blurbs he wrote are really quite odd, as so many things are from decades.
Yeah, and what you said also was, after you realized that, you thought, how did he have time to do anything else at all?
Yeah. I know. I think I have no idea. Yeah, he wrote hundreds and hundreds. You know, he was a writer and a copywriter and a publisher, and did all of these things at the same time. And wrote all these amazing notes in meetings that he then based his blurbs on afterwards, which are really funny. Like, he talks about Yeats as like, Uncle William is as loony as ever. His notes, like, they're really disparaging and awful, but great.
Yeah, it's like for the bookstore, you know, we have all these Yelp reviews, and luckily uniformly they're very good, but there were two that were really horrible. And I realized that actually helps. If you see hundreds of Yelp reviews that are really good and two that are horrible, you go, those people are idiots, and you go to the bookstore.
Yes. It's like the reviewer who always gives it but 1 star because it didn't turn up or something. We thought, well, that's not fair. What are you doing? Or that,
Well,
it was damaged.
It's like when you go to a restaurant and they give it a 1 star because my napkin fell and the waiter didn't pick it up.
So true, isn't it? But that way, you know that real people are reviewing this, and it's not just like, you know, the author's friends.
Exactly. I was looking, okay, so the other thing I thought about, which goes back to your title, is you talk about, you know, it's good that you really did. That's the thing that I think the reader should know that they might not know from the cover, is that it's a wide-ranging book. Like, who would think Marshall McLuhan would be in it, you know?
It's so wide-ranging. Yeah, I think I suppose I would describe it as a book about books. You know, should we judge a book by its cover? But it's a book about words as well. So I look at all sorts of things. I got to write about the writers that I love. So I write about Jane Austen, the way her books have been packaged over the years. And I talk about movies, as we've mentioned, like, you know, the art of the movie tagline. I talk about different facets of language, different genres of books as well, like the books I loved. Like, there's a whole section on children's books. There's a section on genre fiction, so crime and horror, and how these work, you know, as the different ways that they kind of entice us to read them. I look at the Science of Persuasion, which was
an interesting thing for me, because I've always been like, science was my worst subject at school, but I was interested to try and discover if there was such a thing, so I go into all sorts of things, and that's why I found it such a joy to write, because I could use this, these few words on the back of a book as a way of exploring a whole host of subjects, which I hope people will find entertaining.
The other thing about a good book is you can get angry at the author, which is great for our book clubs. So when you said magical realism is not my thing, that's ridiculous. Magical realism is excellent. How can she say that?
Which you are entitled to have that opinion. And actually, I feel like I'm probably slightly contradicting myself anyway, because I have always loved Angela Carter, and maybe she counts as magical realism. I'm not sure.
What's funny, over the years, I've found 50-50. If I say to an author, this smacks a bit of magical realism, half of them feel I'm complimenting them, and half of them think I'm insulting them.
There we are.
Yeah, breaking the fourth wall is something that you either love or you hate.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. It's true. And I think I'm reading a novel at the moment, actually, which I'm enjoying so much. It's very short, but it's called The Vet's Daughter. And it's brilliant. It's written by Barbara Commons, who wrote in the 30s. And it's very dark, very gothic about this girl growing up in this awful household. And I know that it's got some magical realism at the end, because basically the cover design kind of gives it away. So I'm bracing myself for this, but I'm enjoying it a lot. So yeah, everyone breaks their own rules, don't they, I suppose?
Oh, speaking of which, and you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but do you read every book that you blurb?
It's a good question. I do if it's fiction. I really try to. I would probably make an exception for something like War and Peace, obviously. I think it's different depending on the type of fiction you're working on. If it's classic fiction, you often tend to know the story anyway. But if it's something that I think that I don't know the plot to, then I will absolutely read it, because I just want to know what happens at the end. And obviously I don't want to give this away to the reader, but I just want to know the direction of travel, if that makes sense. I want to know.
Yeah, and with nonfiction, like when I interview someone who's a Nobel Prize winner in neuroscience or the seat of human consciousness, you really don't have to read the whole book.
No, and for nonfiction, I just wouldn't, because a lot of the books I work on, they're kind of, 800-page tomes on economics. And so I just couldn't, I would go mad and not have enough time in the day. So obviously it's the introduction, the conclusion, a flick through, a look at the index. And I think sometimes that can help anyway. I think one of the things that I always do, whether I've read the whole book or not, as soon as I've done it and I feel like I've soaked up the voice of the writer, I've got the details I want, those interesting points of interest, which I think might hook a reader in, then I kind of try and forget that I've read it and put myself in the shoes of someone who hasn't read it. And I think for anyone with, an author trying to blurb their own book, I just think it's such a useful thing to do, to try and imagine you don't know anything about this book. And that's always my rule of thumb anyway, even if it's a classic, if it's Pride and Prejudice or something, there might be someone out there who doesn't know what happens. I think I never assume anything, and I always assume somebody could be coming to this completely fresh.
In the future, I think both of us should also read page 69 so I can recommend the book and you can expand your knowledge of the book before you blurb it.
That sounds good.
The other thing you do, and because you work for Penguin, is you talk about, my staff is so upset because I just keep buying more and more Penguin classics because, like you do, I love the way they look. Talk a little bit about that, the concept of why it's so compelling, even though it's so simple.
As in, sorry, what as in?
Like the covers of the Penguin classics, how they started out a certain way and then they changed them, and now.
Okay, right. Sorry. Yes, sorry, I get you now. Yeah, it's interesting. They when they started, they were so pared back. in terms of look and copy as well. Like, they didn't used to have any blurbs on them at all. I think it was assumed that just didn't know about these and that was it. And then I think the way they've changed over the years is really interesting. I think in terms of the copy used to describe them, over the years, it's become possibly less eccentric. I think there was something very eccentric about the way classics were presented. And now I think there's much more of a sense that you want to appeal to as broad and as diverse readership as possible. And so you don't want it to just sound like this old guy telling you about this book, which is probably what it used to sound like. And now the idea is that you want to be very broad. But yeah, I think maybe perhaps things can become a little anodyne as well if you have that approach. I think you still want a bit of eccentricity, a bit of idiosyncrasy there possible.
Well, it's interesting the way you talk about it. Is it Penguin that puts the contemporaneous work of art on the cover?
Yes. And I think that's interesting because of the way that it immediately sends a signal to the reader. One of the things I talk about is the way that copy and image work together, both on the front of a book and the back of a book. And so that immediately places it for a reader. So one of the things I had to do quite recently was write for a book in a series of books where there was no cover image of them. They were just black and white designs. And so I thought, oh, well, hang on, there's something missing here now, because, with the classics that you're talking about, where there's some kind of image on the front, that immediately places it and gives the reader an anchor so they have a sense of time and place. And obviously, if you don't have that, then the copy has to do a bit more heavy lifting in a sense. The words need to do what the image that isn't there would have done otherwise. So I find that really interesting, the way that every element of a cover, I think, is part of a story. It's telling a story about a book. And one of the things that I thought was funny was when we were coming out of our first lockdown in 2020, a lot of people were still very nervous about touching things in public. We were all gelling our hands, weren't we? And so a lot of bookshops in the UK started displaying their books with the back covers outwards in the bookshop, so you couldn't see the front, but you could read the blurb on the back, which obviously my fellow copywriters and I were delighted. Yes, we're having a moment in the sun at last, but at the same time it made us feel like slightly exposed, I suppose, because it's funny, you don't have that introduction that the title, that the title's kind of like the once upon a time. I think that the things that you see on the front of the book, and then the back cover continues that story. And it did make me realize how you need both. Like, they're all part of a whole, they're all part of a book's story and part of its life.
The book is so funny because what you talk about people who blurb, but they use an obscure literary or say scientific reference, and then you go, you don't know what this is, too bad, sorry.
Oh yeah, that's like the classics of old. I think it's, probably now you would say it was an elitist approach, wouldn't you? I think it was, like this book is redolent of, the summers of Thomas Aquinas, or, they talk about the Decembrists and things like that, and all these obscure historical terms. It's like, yeah, you don't know who these people are. It's your loss, basically. And there's a kind of take it or leave it attitude, I suppose you would say. And a lot of older copy that you see on books, they assume a lot of knowledge, and if you don't know it, then tough luck. Even things like the very first edition of The Lord of the Rings, it compared it to Norse mythology, all sorts of things. It's very kind of high-minded, and I find that really fascinating, whereas I think now you would never do that. You'd want to have a far more democratic, diverse approach, that you think you wouldn't want to alienate people, I suppose, which I think is probably a good thing. It has to be a good thing. You have to make things as accessible to many people as possible. But I did wonder sometimes, looking at a lot of very outlandish copy that was on books in the past, perhaps you've lost a little bit of a sense of that personality that you would have had before. I don't know if you find that, if you look at a lot of blurbs on books in your store and things, like, I find a lot of them do feel like they're slightly merging into one now,
and it's
Yeah.
harder to find things that stand out, perhaps.
Well, one thing, I'm kind of condescending because I'm thinking, I can't believe someone doesn't understand this reference. But of course, America is so dumbed down now, unless you speak on an 8th grade level, they probably don't. But the other thing it reminded me of was, I thought, well, this is kind of pompous to make a reference that only 1% of the population will recognize, and it screws up your job. And then I thought, I wonder if you guys have like cliques and you talk about other blurbers and how bad they are. Do you do that?
Funnily enough, a friend of mine and I love nothing more than going around bookshops and looking at all the blurbs on the back. This makes us sound really sad, doesn't it? Like, we just love looking at all the blurbs and going, oh God, that one's terrible. That one's really boring. Like, that one's too long. Why did they use that word? Which, you know, that's my idea of fun. It might not be everybody else's.
No, it is. It's like my mom used to do, like sitting on a bench at the beach and watching the people go by. And how could she wear that? Did she wake up this morning and said, I think I'll wear this dress today? What kind of person is she? It's the same thing.
Yeah. That sounds like a lot of moms out there, I think.
Yeah, she was great with stuff like that. Well, I'm glad you do that because it's a lot of fun. I mean, it's not really mean heart, you know, it's not mean spirited. Well, it is kind of, but.
Well, it's not like they know we're saying that, you know, it's fun for us. And
Would you ever say, I know who wrote this?
No, actually, I think a lot of it is quite a mystery. Like, you know, we often don't know who's written it. And there was one case, actually, I don't know if you read about it over there, that Jeanette Winterson, the Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit, and a lot of very popular books over here, she actually burnt her own books on social media because she hated the blurbs on them so much. They were rejacketed by her publisher in the UK, and she decided that the blurbs offended her so much because she thought they were cozy and domestic that she decided to set fire to her books. So, you know, that's really getting offended by a blurb, I feel, you know. And I don't actually know who wrote them. I think, you know, obviously I was quite relieved that it wasn't me, but I don't know who wrote those. I feel slightly sorry for them, and I hope they managed to sort everything out.
Yeah. And if you go to the total extreme, you know, like J.D. Salinger or even I think Thomas Pynchon, they won't even allow.
Yeah.
They wouldn't allow a blurb from either an author, like in the United States, or from a blurber like you. They don't want anything there. And they can do it because they have the luxury of knowing they're going to sell a lot of books.
Absolutely, yes. Yes, Salinger,
it's in his contract. There's nothing apart from his name and the title of the book. Nothing else is allowed to be on the cover. And that's been the way for years. And no one has ever been allowed to change it. And nobody ever really seems to know why this is the case, but it absolutely is. So that was one of the first things I learned when I started at Penguin, that you just don't try and put any extra words on his covers. There's no point.
I think it's just because he was a misanthrope in general and didn't really like any people at all. But yeah, so anyway, I just, you know, when I first knew I was interviewing, I was wondering, I don't know if I want to read a couple hundred pages about blurbs. And then, as I said, I got drawn in. And what the potential reader doesn't know yet is, as what we're talking about, is that it isn't just about blurbs. And the section about Marshall McLuhan reminded me that for 5 years, I didn't know that it didn't say the medium is the message.
Oh, okay. And apparently that was a printing error, that it became massage, but I'm not sure if that's true or not.
But it worked for me. It was like a moment of epiphany when I realized, no, this doesn't say message. I just anticipated that it was.
You see what you want to see, don't you? It's
really
definitely true. Yeah, I mean, that's the idea. You know, I guess I'm sort of using the blurb as a lens to look through to the whole of world of books and literary history and language and authors, and use it just as a way of writing about literature. The idea is that it's, you know, I want it to be kind of joyful celebration of books and literature for anybody who loves books, really. You know, it's a book for bibliophiles, I hope.
Well, so now that in conclusion, now that you've written this and having done this for so many years, are you ready to write, which you don't like, but you said, are you ready to write the great British novel?
I think nonfiction and fiction are such different beasts. I don't know if you would agree, but I think I've found writing this so enjoyable and so fun. I just loved every aspect of it, because I just felt like I was just writing lots of essays about different things that I loved, different aspects of literature that I absolutely loved. And so the whole process was just really joyful. Whereas I felt like, if I had to write a novel, there's plot, there's character, oh my God, there's dialogue, all these things which are so hard to get right. It's a different, obviously with nonfiction, you have a whole load of research and you have to make it sound entertaining and fun. But they feel like such different things to me, Who knows? I would never say never, but...
Well, the reason I ask is because, first of all, if a book has humor in it, I don't really consider it nonfiction at times. And you almost create little characters as you go through your vignettes. So that'll be the last compliment I pay you. And but I think you can you could definitely do it. But so I'm looking forward to getting the box in October and putting it on the front table and talking about it and having people read it.
Oh, well, I want to see a photo of it, please.
I will. I've done that. I'll take a photo. I'll put a big stack there, and then after the photo is sent to you, I'll remove a few of them from the stack.
Put it in the back room.
I did that with 50 Shades of Grey. I put it in the bathroom.
And they're so similar. My book and that book,
Don't make me laugh. I have a cough. Thank you so much, Louise. This was a pleasure. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Oh, for me too. It's been so great to meet you and chat. It's been lovely.
I agree. Okay, well, hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.